Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And here we are for something that is a little more casual than usual. We are touching in at episode 150, we just released for the old guard. And we realized we kind of didn't make a big deal about it at all. We had mentioned our 3-year anniversary the episode before, but we didn't really say anything about episode 150. So we thought now's a good time we can come in and talk a little bit about it because it is kind of a milestone.
Yeah, and like we said with the 3-year milestone, we want to make it very clear to our listeners that without the support of just people listening, Patreon, all of this stuff, we probably wouldn't be doing it anymore. Just not that we wouldn't have the passion to do it. It's just like the ability to do it.
We probably wouldn't be recording it, at least. We'd just be talking to each other off of mic.
Right. Exactly.
and maybe not making the commitment to do it as much as we're doing. Which, like, honestly, like, I was thinking about that today. We just recorded an episode on Pet Sematary 2 for our Patreon. And the movie was wild. And we have a fun time talking about in all the many ways in which it is just a bonkers movie. But I was just thinking about how it gets fun that we get to do this and get to have these conversations and that anyone's interested in it. So, yeah, we definitely appreciate it. And we feel, humbled that people do it. And I recently tweeted about how we had a listener write in to say that we helped inspire them to start writing again, which was, it's just really cool. It's really touching to know that we're helping sort of like boost the net creativity in the world, which I think is a great thing,
Yeah, it's very humbling. I just, like you said, we'd be having these conversations regardless, I think. And it just, to get it out there and have people respond to it and not just like be, sending it out to the void. It's really humbling and it's really nice to know.
Yeah, and it's funny because like recording it though does bring it to another level, right? Like it's like we gotta take it seriously. We gotta make sure we've thought it through, for the most part, and it adds a certain urgency to the conversation that we wouldn't be having off air. So there's something really cool about recording them and doing it the way we do it.
Yeah, I think it forces us to try to be on our A game, which is nice.
So at episode 100, if you go check that out on the feed, basically we like had a bunch of people write in. We had former guests record little segments for us. We talked about a lot of different stuff, and we probably will touch back in with a similar sort of episode at 200. I think it'd be cool to do that every 100 episodes or so, and because that was a lot of fun, and it's definitely something I want to do. But this isn't like an official episode. This is just more of a casual touching base. And we put a poll up that it's only been up for less than 24 hours. So honestly, because we didn't plan this in advance very well, early indications are people were interested in us talking about our favorite projects, talking about things we've learned as like writers and filmmakers, from covering adaptations.
And also just what we've learned about adaptations.
Yeah, exactly. Like how our perception of adaptations, what we've learned about adaptations in general has changed over time through doing this podcast. And I definitely have opinions about all of that. So, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's just jump into that first one because I think that had the most votes, which was what we've learned about adaptations. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a huge topic, right? Like, adaptations, I'm glad it's huge because we're continuing to study it and learn about it as we go. And I think there's a lot more for me to learn about it. And every adaptation I see is sort of another piece of like, oh, you can do an adaptation like this. And you can, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like you can focus on these sorts of things, or you can reimagine in this way, or you can be faithful in this way. And every data point I get sort of informs the way I feel about adaptations. But one of the things that has developed for me over time, for sure, is that there are two different camps of adaptations, not just in what it's made, but also in like what people who read books and then see adaptations, what they want. Mm-hmm. And not to say there's no overlap, but the two camps are like faithful adaptations that bring the book to life and put it on screen and honor its theme and honor its message. And then there are adaptations that change that. And sometimes it goes wrong, and sometimes it goes right. And sometimes you get great films that are adaptations, but have changed its theme and have changed something at its core and reimagined it in a way for film that maybe matches more what like the filmmaker was trying to get at. And it's difficult to talk about adaptations with any sort of blanket statement because of those two different things. And it's like two different goals and two different expectations from the fan base of like what they want. So it's really hard to navigate that. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, early on, I remember on the podcast saying that I think it was also from the perspective of someone who would read books sometimes in anticipation of a movie coming out and then going to see the movie. My theory on it was basically like if the filmmaker stays as close as they possibly can to the source material, more people will be happy with it. And I think the surface level way of looking at adaptation is that's probably correct. The people who are already invested are going to be more satisfied having seen everything that was in the book. But over time, my opinion is basically flipped to the point that there's no rule to it. I think that there are good and bad adaptations that follow and don't follow the source material. And to be honest with you, a lot of my favorite adaptations deviate from the source material. And so what I've realized is when you get that blending, and I think it's like the pressure cooker of making a film mixed with sort of the intensity of writing and getting something published, like those two things together, when both artists are allowed to be as free and creative as they possibly can and are masters in their fields, can create these like iconic, amazing films that are remembered forever. And so like for me, it really has become, if the filmmakers understand the material enough to play with it, then people will, I think, in general, be more surprised and more into some of the things. But that's to say, people there is that segment, like you said, of people who will always go into an adaptation and say, I can't believe they left this out. I can't believe they left that out. And honestly, like for me, I don't mind scenes being left out as long as the sort of either the truth that the writer was trying to create within the story, the sort of center of the story, either it remains the same or the filmmaker did something innovative or elevated the material in some way. Those are the two things that I think will lead you to a great adaptation, is understanding of the material. Either way, either understanding the material and being able to adapt it and do it very well, or understanding the material in order to subvert and to create anew.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because so often in adaptation discussions, the artistic vision of the director it always comes second to people, right? Like it's if you're a book reader first, like all you care about is that book, and you're not as into like what the filmmaker might have brought to it. And I think through covering this podcast, we really value that, and we look at that as something that should be celebrated. And there's literally a video that just came out on YouTube. Daniel Green, he does book reviews and he talks about other things, mostly fantasy and sci-fi, some horror. And he today put out an episode about The Shining, and I think it's called like Why The Shining is a Great Movie but a Bad Adaptation. Mm-hmm. And I had to click on that because what we do, right? And it's a good video. Everybody should go out and watch it. He's definitely trying to like stir things up, get people to come click on it, and he admits that in the episode itself. And he says like, oh, it's a great movie. I'm not disputing that, but I think it's a bad adaptation. And he goes into like all these reasons why. And essentially his argument is that it is unfaithful to the book, right? Like here's all the reasons here's all the things the book did and why the book was great. And then here's all the ways in which Stanley Kubrick didn't do that, subverted it, changed it, and he, in his opinion, is not as good. Like he does say, like, I don't think it's as good as the book.
Wow.
And I respect that. You know what I mean? Like I respect him taking that stand. But I don't know. Like it was to me kind of a very specific view of what makes a good adaptation, and I kept coming back to like I can see that, but on the other hand, The Shining is a brilliant adaptation in my opinion. You know what I mean? And it's not because it's faithful. It's because it is iconic film in horror history that was made from an iconic book in horror history. And both exist. And both are different. And I know it feels like I'm like not choosing a side when I say that. But like, I think it's great that there's this movie out there that is very different and it's very much a Kubrick film. You know what I mean? In a way that Stephen King's book is not. Kubrick didn't come in and say, I'm going to make a faithful adaptation of The Shining. That was never his goal. If he had wanted to do that, it would have been a very different movie. Yeah. And in my opinion, it probably wouldn't have stood the test of time because I think that book works better as a book.
Yeah.
in my opinion. Anyway, so I'm not trying to like no hate on Daniel Green. I think he's great and you should subscribe to his channel. But I just I don't know. I had a lot of opinions after watching that video, and I think it ties into what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's aware of what he's saying, and I think he knows that. I think bad gets clicks. So I think that like saying it's a bad adaptation is the instead like what's the title if you don't say bad adaptation? You know, the title would be you know,
let's talk about The Shining, which is kind of what we do.
I think he realizes that it's not a. If it was a bad adaptation, I think the representation of a bad adaptation would be a bad film. So it's just that's in, and it's really where you draw the line. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. So what was the next topic? We have our favorite projects, and we have how it has affected us as writers and filmmakers. Yeah. Which one do you want to go to first?
Let's do the filmmaker/writer one, because I think this kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with what we were just talking about. So
yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you got to say about this.
Yeah. What I've realized watching all of these movies for the podcast is the consistency of a good movie to me in my research and the kinds of filmmakers that make them is always in preparation. And I have talked about this on the podcast a little bit about sort of like how preparation can create something amazing. And a lot of people will be like, oh, but you need to be artistic and loosey-goosey on set. And like that I do agree with. But sort of what it's taught me as a filmmaker, like an aspiring filmmaker, when I go to direct next, I absolutely will be taking that to heart, because a lot of filmmakers have talked about that, and just me seeing the end result and seeing sort of people's process, I know that I'm the type of filmmaker that's going to storyboard, I want to visualize, I want to know what's going to happen before I get there on the day, to the point that you can prepare and have it, like you can do the work on the day, but sort of have everything in order, all your ducks in a row, and just knowing, like I've said, I think understanding the materials, like I was talking about with adaptation, is imperative, because even if you wrote it, you need to understand you need to be ready for any question that anyone could ever ask, and you need to understand your world and your characters to that extent. And again, that I think that just comes down to preparation. So for me, it's really just been the galvanizing of an idea of preparation is what I'll take from all these other filmmakers that have come before me, and sort of that's what I'll be using, I think, most that I've learned so far.
Yeah, I like that. You also do, you are on set, I mean, not much lately with COVID,
right?
But you are on sets, you know, doing cam ops and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're doing things like that. And I'm wondering, have you ever thought of the podcast while doing even that kind of stuff? Like, do you ever think about how something's going to look, and think about something we've talked about?
I mean,
I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. You can't avoid sort of your creative thoughts, like always being, you know, at the forefront of your mind. So like something that I talk about on the podcast, if there's like a particular shot that I like, or a particular style or something like that, particular style of lighting, things like that, you know, a lot of people don't want input on sets because it's sort of very it's a hierarchy. But I have been fortunate enough to work with people that would love any input. Like they're the kind of people that are like, if you see something, say something, and let's make the best thing we possibly can. So, you know, there's definitely been situations where I've just been like sort of pulling from my knowledge of like things that I've seen, things that I like, and then I'll reference something and say like maybe something like this. And, you know, that's always going to be an opportunity that can arise on set for sure.
That's cool. So for me, from the writing side, it's difficult to quantify, but I know that the effect of this podcast has been massive on my writing. Reading broadly is always something that I heard as an advice, like you should do as a writer. But truly reading broadly for this podcast, I think has really helped me. So it helped me in sort of determining, like, first off, all the different kinds of books that are out there that can be written. And I know that there are more that we haven't gotten into, but we've covered a pretty good range at this point, I think it's safe to say. Mm-hmm. And then determining from that what it is I like about them has been very valuable to me. Like, what do I like about this genre of story? What do I like about this kind of writing? What do I like about this mode of storytelling? And then you take all of that with you and you put it all in your sort of subconscious when you sit down to write. And I'm writing a sci-fi novel now. I'm kind of in the process of revising. It's kind of like on its, I don't know, third, fourth draft. And I also write short fiction on the side. And in my short fiction, I dabble in different genres. And definitely doing this podcast has affected that. It's shown me what's possible. It's shown me, what kind of storytelling I enjoy, and that has changed so much from when we started. Whereas when we started, I think I was very set in like, I like this kind of story, and I was much more sort of regimented, and like I thought I'd figured it all out. I thought I'd like, I've read enough. I know I like this. And since doing this, like it's opened me to all kinds of other types of stories that can be told, and other things that interest me. So in that sense, I think I want to think I'm a more versatile writer, and that I have a bigger well of things to draw on. You still have to filter in your own experience through that, but I think anytime you can sort of broaden your horizons as far as like what's possible with art and with writing is good, because you're going to have more tools. You're going to have just a larger scope of things that are possible. And when you sit down to write, I think that's always going to be an improvement. So for me, like it's been like a all encompassing. I think it has really helped me in a lot of ways. And that's why I view this podcast going hand in hand with my sort of artistic journey as I'm continuing to grow as an artist and as a writer. I think this podcast has been like a huge piece of that, especially now that I'm not in an MFA anymore and I'm not otherwise studying writing. Like, this has been a great way to continue to feel like my goal of learning and growing and exploring in fiction is ongoing, and will continue to be ongoing, hopefully, as long as I'm doing this.
Yeah, I also love the idea of the podcast being sort of I love like I've seen it in you, like your cinematic knowledge, like your like all that kind of stuff is always going to come into to play in your writing, I'm assuming, as well too. You know what I mean? Like, as you've learned from film, it might inform some of your writing in the same way that I, coming into the podcast, didn't think of myself as a writer in any way, and now it's a goal of mine to start, to start like really focusing on like writing my own material to get to then direct, and then to to create my own art entirely. Yeah. Whereas before I wasn't confident enough to say that.
If I may, an observation for me is that I feel like you were very into the like process of making a film, and I think doing the podcast has made you focus more on like the story behind it.
Yeah,
like the developing the characters and like really tying into like the story behind before you ever get on set to film something. Right. Like what needs to be in place, I think is something that feels like you're more dialed into now.
I totally agree with that. I mean, that's what I mean. Just like. I don't think I can look at my short films from college and that kind of stuff and just know that I wasn't putting in the sort of like story-based character buildings, like the way that I was thinking of the world and that kind of stuff in the way that I would now, So like given the opportunity in the future, I guarantee it'll change the way I like approach a story.
Well, knock on wood, good luck to both of us. I hope we can do a lot more of this as COVID begins to lessen its grip on all of us. Hopefully we can get back to it. And I'm still writing, but obviously you can't be out there shooting films right now. It's not really happening. So hopefully we can get back to it. This did kind of rattle a thought loose I wanted to do, just touching back in on adaptation real quick. I was trying to figure out like, why do we use the word adaptation to describe this? And it's like, well, clearly it's about transformation, right? And I saw this definition, actually. I'll just read it. This is a biological process, according to Merriam-Webster. It's one of the many definitions, but I think it's very similar, and I think it's interesting to think about. So here it is. Adaptation. Modification of an organism or its parts to make it more fit for existence under the conditions of its environment. And I think that is kind of what this is getting at, because you're taking a story and you're modifying it to fit its new environment, which is its new medium. Right? So I think that is what it's talking about. And I just think it's always important to remember that there is a fundamental change happening when you shift medium to medium. And in the process of that change, you're modifying and you're adjusting something. It will never be the same. Even a really faithful adaptation like we saw with The Silence of the Lambs, it's going to be different, and it has to be by definition. And we should embrace that. We should welcome it, in my opinion, as moviegoers.
I love that.
So that's why I'll never be someone who is like so set in my ways with like something has to be so faithful. Like, I think you're sort of missing part of the process when you do that.
I mean, definitely. I think really that's what the podcast is cooked out of all of the stories and everything that we've covered, is that it is you have to fit the medium. Like it could be a perfect adaptation in every way and be a boring movie. You know what I mean? And be not visually interesting or not economic with the story. You know what I mean? Economic with the time that you have with a movie and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I've never heard that definition. So I'm glad that you read that because honestly, like I'll come back to that and think about that a lot. Also, real quick, shout out to Chris C for suggesting that filmmaker writer topic right there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was a great one. I'm glad we got to touch on that. So the last thing we wanted to touch in on was our favorite projects. Now in the past we've talked about favorite adaptations. We've talked about the difference in the different kinds of adaptations, but this one is favorite projects. So in this one we are sort of encompassing the book and the film, and then not just that, also our coverage of it, which isn't something we've really done, and is also something that is very difficult to do. It's like trying to choose your favorite child. It feels very difficult.
It's also like you feel a sort of like recency bias in here too, because like there's things that we covered more recently that were a lot of fun, but like you thinking back, like is there something that you liked more covering 2.5 years ago? You know.
Well, and then there's also like a reverse recency bias for me sometimes, where I'll undervalue something that we might have just covered because it's like, oh, that's just because it's fresh. Right. Whereas like a year from now, I actually might look back at it and go like, man, that was really something special and great.
I mean, and just to drop like probably the ultimate nostalgia bomb for the podcast is like clearly one of our favorite projects is always going to be it because it was the first thing we covered and the way that we covered it. And it's just like, I
almost had to disqualify it from this because it's the first one. So it's going to have a weight that none of the others can match in a way, you know? And for the same reason, I think Blade Runner, because it was our first time going away from horror. It was like we had spent all this time doing horror for 6 straight episodes to start the podcast off. And then all of a sudden we went into sci-fi and it was like really fresh and different. And, you know, for every genre, the first time we touched there, we did that with Howl's Moving Castle. It was the first time we covered fantasy. And it was like, oh, this is big and different. So I don't know. There's always something there, too, that is going to be hard to replicate.
And also another thing to take into account is just like the conversations that projects pull out of us too. Like I specifically remember like Blade Runner being a sort of moment for that. Like going into sci-fi the first time, Philip K. Dick, one of my favorite movies with the original Blade Runner, and then we got this amazing new movie, and like I just remember that so fondly because everything was hitting on every cylinder, and we had I think it pulled a great conversation out of us, and that's something that in favorite project, like how much enjoyment we had, I think the conversation and the end product that we put out too is gonna play some effect in there.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And then one final factor that we have to mention, we've had so many great guests on for this podcast. And I have loved every guest conversation we've had, truly, throughout this entire podcast. And so when I start thinking about like, am I like pitting one guests against one another? And is that affecting the way I chose it? And like, that gets really messy. So I kind of had to like ignore that and focus more on like, just my experience and what it pulled out of me, kind of what you said, and the project itself, and like the combination of all those things. And I kind of couldn't engage with like whether or not we had a guest and like who that guest was, because that completely skewed things. Because we've had so many great ones.
Yeah, it feels weird. We would just be listing guests that we had and how awesome all of our guests have been. Right. So yeah, I agree. Yeah. I tried to sort of just like boil it down to like my personal enjoyment and sort of how it all shook out.
Yeah. For the ones I ended up choosing 3, by the way. And all 3 of the, and honestly, they're not, I'm not going to say they were runner-ups and they're all equal in my eyes. And there could have been more. And 2 out of 3 of the projects did have a guest on, but the guest being there wasn't because they were like the best guest. They were among the best. They're all the best. Right. You know what I mean? So that is just, it's more about the other reasons. Anyway, let's continue. Yeah. Did you pick several or do you?
Yeah,
how many
I picked
did you have?
many. There's no like one favorite for me. I picked a few that were recent.
Can you narrow it down to 3? I think if we want to maybe go back and forth.
Well, this is what I have. I have 3 recent, which I can narrow down to like 1 or 2 maybe, and then I have 3 sort of all-timers, and like I had it on the list. I had Blade Runner on the list that I've already taken off. There's like 3 others that I feel like are all-timers.
Yeah, no, you're kind of right. I could easily do that as well. So let's go through them quickly then. So if we're doing 6, I don't want to spend that much. You know, we just have to rattle them off.
Cool, yeah. Let's go with the like all-time ones, just because I feel like there's like to kind of understand what we're saying. Like if you've heard the episodes, you know why. If you are curious, go listen to those because they're probably just massive projects for us. So for me, Fellowship when we covered Fellowship. That's always going to be an all-timer for me. It's like a classic story for me. It's everybody loves Tolkien's world, everything like that. But just to get to jump into it for the first time in the time period that we did it, and the movie, Peter Jackson's movies and everything, I think that's obvious.
Yeah, it's funny because for me, I kind of rolled that all into our Lord of the Rings coverage, which we recently finished with Return of the King. And I said, like, all of those together is kind of one big project for me.
I mean, I would agree with that.
I look back at all of them. And I agree. That's a lot of episodes. I think we did 12 episodes on it. And it was great. It was definitely one of my favorite projects we've done, for sure.
Right. Another one that I think both of us like clearly loved was Children of Men. That's just an all-timer for me. The movie is like, you know, you said it's one of your favorite movies of all time. It's definitely one of my favorite movies of all time. And then the act of reading the book that it was based on, sort of going backwards because we had both seen the movie, was really interesting. And then just reaffirming like how amazing of a filmmaker Alfonso Cuarón is and how like absolutely amazing that movie is. Yeah,
it's cool to touch back in on him with Prisoner of Azkaban too. Yep. Yeah, that was actually one of my three. It's a big one for me, and for the reasons you say, and then also, I think politically, we covering it at the time in which we did, where there still is this ongoing anti-immigration administration in our country, and literally children in cages, and all this stuff happening on the borders. And then we covered this story that like was dealing with all of that head on, and so many other things. Like it was so many big ideas, so many philosophical discussions, and I felt like covering that with you was just like it was so much fun, but also just like so it was very serious, and it enabled me to really dig deep and try and understand my own feelings on a lot of this stuff. And for me, that's always going to be a highlight project that we've covered.
Yeah,
Children of Men.
It's such a human story, and then it's also like in other ways like it seems otherworldly. Like it feels like sort of like a myth at this point. You know, it feels like something that's that important. So yeah, it's just like you said, covering it was just a ton of fun in kind of a sombering way.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go with another one. And this one really stands out to me, and I don't think it's because we just covered the sequel, but Pet Sematary. I think it's because I was able to really get into some of the ways in which Stephen King means a lot to me because of my mother and how much she loved Stephen King. And I was able to talk about that on one of the episodes in there, and then revisit sort of like dealing with loss. And she's passed away. So I think it was a profound project for me for that reason. The movie, we had a great time talking about it with Sarah, but I think the reason more is for those book episodes.
Yeah.
I think that's the reason I really value that project, as far as like within our catalog of things we've covered.
Right. I mean, and it's sort of pure Stephen King. It's like that and The Shining.
And that's a very personal reason for me.
I mean, I agree. That was a fun one to do. Having covered a few Stephen King going into that, I think we were sort of like becoming Stephen King, like we were starting to fill out the world of Stephen King and like sort of his writing style and everything. And then just to go to something that I was like, of course, Stephen King, king of horror, all this stuff. He's always been around. And to be surprised by a novel that was sort of what I was expecting, but like, even more so. And like you said, deep. It's got a very solid core. So another one for me is always going to be something that we talked about earlier, The Shining. It's inescapable.
That was on my list.
Inescapable. Yeah. Stephen King we just talked about, but then you add on Stanley Kubrick, one of the most legendary filmmakers of all time, innovative, highly influential person, and just like the myth around the story, all the conspiracy theories,
the drama around it.
It's just that was such a fun project to dig into.
It's the reason, people are still putting out videos today about it, right? Like it's endlessly interesting to look at through the lens of adaptation and what it means to be a good adaptation. Yeah. And so, it's one that I value. I stand by our coverage of it. Our episodes on the book do well on YouTube. So definitely a cool project and one I definitely highly value. All right, I only got one more that I think I'm going to touch on. How many you got
I just
left?
have I have three more, but I'm just gonna give these are like recency bias ones that I don't want to say are all timers yet, but
Yeah, because mine actually isn't that
okay.
recent, so I do want to hear some more
Okay,
recent
so
ones.
some recent ones that I've just found the coverage to be, again, conversations that were pulled out, what was in the material,
Hmm.
how deep we could go. Arrival is definitely on that
Yeah,
list. Um,
great. So I mean, Ted Chiang is just so brilliant, and I'm glad that we got to cover him. And he is someone who my well of respect for that man is just
yeah,
it's just like limitless now. And I mean, I'll hear a quote he'll drop on a panel or something, and I'll just be like, my God, that's something I want to like write down and remember
yeah,
forever. And it'll just be something he'll throw out offhand, and he's so amazing.
yeah. And then you get Denis Villeneuve, who I respect completely in
Exactly.
every way, and then you add those two together, and you just get this amazing project. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Very recently, we did Princess Bride, which I just found personally to
Yeah.
be a lot of fun. And
That was a lot of fun. It was so recent, I almost couldn't do
right.
it because of that, though. It was like, oh, we just did
It's
that,
so
so I
recent.
can't touch that. It's too
It's so
fresh.
recent, but the reason I bring it up is because I said in our coverage I like the book more than the movie, which I never expected, and that
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine saying that before you went to it?
no,
Like, hey, you're actually gonna like this book more than the
no, I would have
movie.
said no. You know, I'd be like, you're incorrect, but it's
Yeah,
true. It's and so like just to that was such
and
a fun
and,
project.
and I'll even say like, don't get us wrong, James loves that
Yeah,
movie. I also really love
absolutely.
it. But it's one of his favorite movies, and that did not change. It's just that you really really like the movie, or sorry, you really really like the
Yeah,
book.
definitely. And then another one. Partially, I mean, just the whole project was a lot of fun, but then we also had a bonus episode, and there was other stuff that went on. But Watchmen, the
Yeah,
act of reading the comic that I had read before, but didn't, I like I said in the episodes, I didn't feel like I was able to connect with it at the young age that I read it at, and like being an adult now, and like knowing the things that I know, and then we get an adaptation by Zack Snyder, which is like divisive, and then beyond
yeah,
that we get the HBO show by Lindelof that was
right.
just
Which we did a bonus episode
and then
on.
Lindelof
Yeah,
just absolutely took everything that Watchmen could be and then also elevated that, and it's just like unbelievable project.
it's great. Yeah, such a cool project. I mean, Daryl Gregory, we have to shout him
Yeah,
out, came on for that and was such a great guest and was able to educate
yeah.
us, honestly, on Watchmen in a lot of
Comic
ways.
history and sort of like putting it in its place and how important it is and all that.
Yeah, great one. Absolutely, man. Okay, I'm going to hit you with mine. This is an all-timer for me and one I'll always think of and cherish in our coverage, and that's Annihilation.
Oh yeah.
One of the reasons it's an all-timer for me is because I loved the book. I loved the film for different reasons. It was a transformative adaptation, much like we talked about with The Shining. It's a divisive project. I know a lot of people don't agree. A lot of people didn't. A lot of people don't like the book. A lot of people don't like the movie. People who are fans of one might not like the other. But for me, I liked both
Yeah.
for different reasons. I thought they were great. It was a new book for me. I'd never read before, so it's always fun when I get to discover something in the process of covering it. And it is there's sort of a cosmic thing going on in that book that I just love personally in fiction, and it's like talking about some of the like profound ways that like biology and life in general is unknowable, and it can be so horrific but also beautiful, and the way those things come together is just brilliant. And then yeah, Jeff Vandermeer's novels, the way they were written, I really enjoyed. Like I loved the way it played with us and made us feel like we were reading someone's notebook who had experienced all
Hmm.
of this, and that their mind was being lost on the page as we read it. I just thought it was so cool, such a great idea. And it's something I'll always look back on. And then Remy Nakamura came on again. He was on for The Shining, and he was on for that coverage of the film. And I just love talking with him about it. He's been a great guest for us.
Yeah, definitely. Really one of the projects that like solidified, like I knew I liked weird stuff, but like that solidified for me that like I seek it out. You know what I mean? That I
Yeah.
want unique, I want weird, I want to be surprised obviously, but like I want to go to places that I couldn't have imagined. And I think like that's the story like that, like you say, like playing with like how brutal life can be and how like you said, down to like the cellular level, and then also to sort of like what it means to be human and what it means for us as like a sort of society that we've created, and like how biology created something like that, and yeah, it's got a lot in there.
Yeah, it kind of reminds you that you are a biological being, among other biological beings, right?
And at the same time makes you feel like we're on the top of the food chain, and also like infinitesimal, like we're also just like so unimportant in the grand scheme and all of that. So
yeah, love it. All right, you have any others? Have we talked about
that? That's it for me. That's all the ones that I was going to bring up.
So, I know it sounds like we just kind of listed everything. There are many more projects. And when I was looking through our catalog, I was like, ooh, but this one, ooh, but this one. I kept wanting to like talk about everything. Everything has all of them have had great moments that stand out to me. Every time I love that they're all recorded, because I can go back and listen to them and revisit those moments.
Yeah.
It's a really cool thing that this has been able to do for us. And I'm excited to go forward and just continue to build on this catalog and build on the things that we've covered, and continue to grow and learn, like we've talked about, as artists ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I love that we get to do this. Thank you guys all so much for listening. We figured out what we are now as a podcast. I think we've settled in. We are a niche podcast, but we are happy to have the listeners we have, and we always hope that we can continue to grow that as much as possible, while knowing that we're never going to be the next Joe Rogan or something that we would ever want to be.
Yeah.
Not that we would ever want to be. That's a weird name to throw out, but that's the one that came to my head. He's a popular podcaster. That's the only reason I thought of it.
Basically the largest listenership right now. So I get why you went there, but funny place to go for sure. I'm just looking forward to learning. I'm going to continue. I'm never going to think that I know, like I'm never going to go into any situation thinking that I know everything about adaptation. Whereas like earlier on in the podcast, I feel like we really had a hold on it, and like we know a lot, but I want to continue to learn.
It's funny how that works, right? Like the more you learn about things, the more you realize what you don't know.
It's true. It really is true.
That's just true in life. You think you know a lot about something, but then when you really dig into it, you're like, holy shit, I don't know anything about it. I think there's a certain phenomenon. I'm drawing a blank on the name of that, but that is a thing that has been observed.
Yeah.
Where people who really smart people tend to realize that they don't know everything, and people who are maybe not as smart tend to think they know a lot. And that is also true in microcosm when it comes to just like subjects, like thinking you know a lot about a subject and then realizing you really don't.
Absolutely.
Anyway, we've I think we've hit the end here. We did also want to say there is a lot of just really dark stuff happening in the world. Jacob Blake's shooting, being paralyzed. I mean, I'm really glad that he didn't die. I'm really happy to hear that, but he was paralyzed, shot 7 times in the back by the police in Kenosha. It's horrific. And all the things that have happened since then. And, that's just one of many instances of police brutality, specifically against Black people in this country. And we just wanted to say that our heart breaks for it, for him and for everybody involved, and that it is important. It is important as it's ever been to vote for Joe Biden and to defeat Donald Trump and to defeat white supremacy as much as possible in the White House, and sort of change where this country is headed. And we hope all of you have checked your registration and that you have made a plan to vote. I think it's going to be very important to do it early and to do it as safely as you can. And we really hope that this isn't something we will have to continue to talk about on the podcast, because that's not what this podcast is. We talk about adaptations, but I feel compelled.
It's our whole lives right now. You know what I mean? It's like, it's all consuming, and like, if you're ignoring it, then you're the problem. So it's just one of those things that like absolutely has to end. It can't continue.
Yeah. So we encourage you to give money if you can, whether that's to Black Lives Matter as a cause, or local charities, or any other, legal funds that are fighting this. There's so many valuable and great things out there that you could give money to, and we encourage you to do it because it does help. And there are people out there fighting the good fight, and we want to encourage whatever whoever we can, whatever we can do to help. We want to do it.
Yep, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, absolutely, always. And just because we might not mention it on every episode, doesn't mean that we don't support it, and we believe it. And we want to continue to do what we can. But all that being said, this is an episode where we're sort of celebrating 150 episodes of Ink to Film. And on that note, we do want to thank you all for joining us and for sticking with us. And we hope that you stick around for the future because we have a lot of fun things coming up that we're going to be covering. I know our next episode I'm excited for is going to be on Screamers, which is a movie that I saw once, but I barely remember. So we're going to be getting back into that. It's brand new for you. Philip K. Dick adaptation, once again. Should be a lot of fun. We hope you stick around for that. And until next time.
Thanks for listening.